Hello and welcome to episode 11, I think it is. 11 of the Wind Up podcast. I'm your host, Mike of MTGA Wines. It is good to be back. We missed last week. I apologize. Normally, we would have done a live episode. I was unavoidably detained. For those that follow our other social media networks, I had a long drive on Wednesday last week, getting a Topanga, a beautiful Volkswagen bus, old school. So happy. She drives like a dream. But for those that know anything about those old VW buses, they pretty much top out at like 60, maybe 65 miles an hour. So it was a long drive home with her. And on top of that, to make matters even a little bit more complicated, I've been working with a thrown out back for the last few weeks, and sitting for that period of time, it was not in the cards to sit down and record a show and do all the things. And in that same light, if you're watching this video or if you happen to hear a little like wince as we're going, that's because I twisted and I moved a little bit too fast. So I'm going to try my best to get through this as comfortably as possible this week. But regardless of all that nonsense, we have a great show for you. We're going to get into our April Q&A today. We're going to dive into a few different topics, just based on questions that we received in the cellar, questions that we received via social media. Just a reminder, if you have a burning question that you would like to have answered in regards to winemaking, the wine business, the hospitality industry, anything of that nature, submit them. You can throw them into the comments. You can slide into our DMs. Any of those things will work just fine. And we'll try and wrap up as many of them into our end of the month show. The last Wednesday of every month, we try and do this Q&A and dive into some of these questions to really get further into the industry and kind of what we chat about here. In that same light, this is a great way to help kind of produce content. A lot of these, in fact, there's one of them this week that is definitely going to be dedicated to an entire episode. In fact, I'm pushing back another topic for one of the topics we're going to just lightly touch on today. We're kind of late to the game when it comes to the discussion of this, and this is going to be the whole Dylan Mulvany and her impact on Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch and InBev and how that's impacted the beverage industry as a whole. We're going to touch on that, but on the second week of April, we are going to dive into that in a lot more detail. And realistically, I think the conversation that no one's having when it came to that. And yeah, I know we're like a month behind current events. Sorry, I don't read the news much because it's too damn depressing. But we're going to touch on that, and we're going to have a whole episode dedicated to that because it was a great question that I had while I was in Houston last week with some friends and doing a wine tasting and event, and they were curious as to how that was kind of shaken down into even the wine world, even though that was obviously beer. It still has an impact on kind of marketing and sales and everything else, and since we've seen kind of the fallout of that. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk a little bit more about the wine business. We are also going to actually a couple questions about the wine business, and I think that's where we will start. Then we'll get into more the current events side of things as what's been happening recently kind of in and around the world of wine. So let's get this started, shall we? And this is a great question. And this is something that this first one here is, why do small producers stay small? Why not bring on investors? Why not try and grow? Why not try and get your wine out and about and around the country in restaurants, retail shops, the whole nine? And this is something that we touched on in the wine business episode. What episode was that? I believe it was episode 9. So a few weeks back. And it was, to be honest, it's just a stylistic consideration of what type of business you want to run. I mean, for me personally, from a business standpoint, I like being the small business. I like having direct access to the customers, whether it's our club members, folks on our mailing list, the referral sources, whether it's a concierge or a driver that brings us or sends guests our way, or if it's, one of our club members sending their friends, texting me and saying, hey, we have friends coming out. We want to make sure that they get to experience Napa like we did. Can you host them? So I got to adjust my back already. It's been all 5 minutes. I'm already like, ugh. gonna have to stretch after this. And we had dinner with some friends. One of our good friends, he is down in the he's getting his his MBA, right, down at Stanford, and he's kind of keying in on some things in the wine industry in particular. And I'm in one of these positions where, and I have a good friend that does this. It's hey, we want to create volume. We want to, be everywhere. We want to sell this business for millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars at some point. And we're just kicking out product. It's got to be good, obviously, because it needs to, fill some sort of void. We have to hit a certain price point. We have to do all these things. And that's just frankly not the game I want to play. It's funny when I run into him every once in a while. He's like, and the question he asks every single time is, how much wine you making these days? And my answer is always like, oh, we're sitting around that, 1,200, 1,000, 1,200 case mark, still pretty small. And there's that like brief pause of like, And I don't know, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but knowing that he's, that kind of serial entrepreneur trying to ramp up production and make as much wine as he can and get it everywhere as quickly as he can, good on him. It's just a different style of business. For me, there's just something about walking into our cellar when, we have, 50 barrels in there and I can slowly kind of taste through things. I can host a couple of groups that day. It's a little bit more, I don't know, it doesn't feel like as much of a grind as working for some of the big producers that I've worked for in the past. And I think that's why a lot of people stay small, is they want to just be able to do what they want to do. They just want to make great wine, make a good, comfortable living. We don't need to be filthy rich or anything like that. It's just, we're just having fun doing it, and it's all good. I do know that for a lot of small producers too, they don't want to answer to anybody. They want to have full creative control and license to do what they want to do when they want to do it. So they're not going to bring on investors. They're not going to bring in outside capital. They're going to, because then you add complexity to this. Believe me, I've hosted many people who have come out, frankly, under the guise of like, oh, we'd love to taste your wines and, see what they're all about. And it turns out that they're looking for small brands to invest in. And we have a tough conversation of, sorry, I'm not interested in your money. It's kind of hilarious, actually. And I tell them point blank, I'm like, listen, if you're really serious about investing in a winery, you need to understand that the likelihood that you make a boatload of money is basically zero. Unless it's just a brand that is on fire. It's one of those exceptions that proves the rule. I've seen too many people just dive in like, oh, it'd be so great to own a chunk of something. And they get into it and 7 years goes by and they have not seen a dime from it. They might get that case of wine, as their dividend, basically, as being a supporter. But it's more of a lifestyle thing. You did have someone like Hall St. Helena. I think that's how they raised a lot of their money to build that St. Helena facility, if I remember right. I might be speaking out of turn there. But it's why Hall has kind of this ownership group that invested X amount of dollars. I don't know how it broke down. I never saw how, I'm sure there were different tiers to it and all that kind of stuff. But they have like an ownership weekend, and it's like hundreds of people show up to like come out, grab their case of wine. They get special like discounts and deals and things of that nature. At least they used to. That's how it always was. I don't know if they've changed really since then. But as a result, if you have a bunch of shareholders, especially for the ones that have a large stake in your business, now you have to answer to somebody. And quite frankly, I don't want to answer to anybody. And I know there's a lot of other small producers that stay that way as well. They're just like, you know what? It's nice just to be able to do what we do. And I don't even want to deal with it. For those that don't know, this is actually kind of a funny but maybe even tragic story, at least for one person. This is probably around like late 90s, early 2000s when, oops, sorry, I didn't turn off my phone. There's a ding. My bad. Back in the late 90s, my grandfather actually sold what was 5% of his interest in Conn Valley Vineyards to another gentleman, and that's what helped fund the new cave getting built. From what I understand of the story, both my mother or father didn't really know that was happening, and it just kind of happened, and then away we went. That gentleman, I believe, has since been bought out. He might still have that 5%. I honestly don't know. This is how hands off I am with the family business. But now all of a sudden you have this minority shareholder that now is looking for a return on that kind of investment. And it was a little hectic there through the 2000s and early 2010s, trying to figure out, hey, like, here's the reality of this business. Like, we're kind of sorry that he, did this. Because it's something that, one, we probably wouldn't, I think my folks were both on the side of like, this is probably something we wouldn't have approved in terms of like a sale within the company. We would have tried to figure it out a different way. But now it was someone who was like, hey, we need this, really, even though he's a minority shareholder, still wanted to have, a say in the operations. And I've met the guy a couple times. Nice dude. I hope it worked out for him. I have no idea. This is, every time someone's that's like, oh, why don't you work for your folks? Reasons like this, because there have been little things that have happened, and this was kind of a bigger thing, I suppose, that needed a lot of ironing out in the long run. And from what I understand, it got sorted out eventually, which is good. But it was one of those moments, like, all of a sudden you've added a layer of complexity to your business that wasn't there before, and now you have an outside influence that can either be a thorn in your side or maybe a great asset. And this definitely, I think for them, fell kind of in the middle there. And for MTGA, for those that have offered to like invest in our business, I simply say, hey, if you really want to invest in MTGA, buy the wine. That's the best thing you can do. And for any small producer, this is something I recommend, is if you really want to be a part of it, buy the wine and support the brand, join the wine club, join the allocation list, and help them pay the bills, basically through that support. And you get an instant dividend in the form of wine. I know that's not exactly what you're looking for necessarily with an investment. You probably want more of a return, but it's a lot more likely that you're going to enjoy that wine rather than maybe or maybe not making X%, based on your financial investment. So staying small, from a business sense, is just, it simplifies things. It allows us small producers to kind of do what we want to do and not have to answer to anybody, which is the best. It's so nice. It's so nice not having to answer to people. It's so great. Alrighty. Question number 2. The hardest thing about the wine business. What is it? And this might surprise you. We talk about harvest as like this crazy period of time, right? Where from late August through October, it's gangbusters, right? It is 24/7. You're just going. If you've ever been out here, and some of you have, for those that have come and visited with me, in the cellar, like if you've been out in October, like you've seen me. It looks like I rolled out of bed. I'm in torn up jeans. I might have been half covered in purple. I'm usually sipping on a whiskey by that point, and I'm just like, you can just see it, And it's such a crazy time, but that's not the hardest thing. Harvest is actually as tough. It's a lot of hard work, and it's very, very tough, and it's a grueling schedule for a few months, but that's not the hardest thing. Realistically, the winemaking's, it's tough and it's very hard to do well, but the hardest thing, number one, no matter what anybody says, is selling your wine. Once you have wine in bottle and it's time to get it into people's hands, selling it is the number one hardest thing, bar none. There's nothing else that's harder, because now you're competing. And we do say out here, there's very much a like rising tide raises all ships kind of mentality when it comes to the wine industry. I want people to drink wines that my friends are making, from other small brands that I love to support, all that good stuff. But even then, getting people on board with buying your wine is challenging, which is why it takes so long to actually build a brand and do well within the wine industry financially and make a living at it. Because, man, talk to anybody who's been in the wine industry for a while, the number of small labels that we have seen come and go because people are like, oh, we're just going to make wine and it'll sell. Guess what? No, it's not. Napa wines are among some of the most in-demand wines in the world, and brands still fail because they don't have a business plan or a sales plan or a strategy, anything resembling any of that. I have talked to some of my growers who have started some of their own labels in the past, and their just inventory is just stacking up and stacking up, and they're like, what do we do? How do we sell it? And I'm like, well, do you have a tasting room? Okay, no tasting room. Great. So you have a website. I saw that. That's nice. How many people are ordering from your online shop? Obviously, it's not many because you got inventory laying around, right? 2, are you distributing the wine? Are you selling it through retail shops, restaurant? No, we're not doing that. Okay, so the 2 major sales channels that we use, the wholesale side of things as well as the direct side of things via like allocation list or wine club, you're simply not doing. What did you expect, like, to make a wine and then people are just going to kick down your door and you're going to sell out of it immediately? The only time that really happens, if you come out of the gate, as much as I hate saying this because everyone should at this point know my opinion on wine scores and how irrelevant I think they really are realistically, but they still work, is if you get that 100-point score like out of the gate, that'll do it. That'll do it. You have an all-star winemaker behind it. You have a high score to get you started, and then that gets you traction. But that still leans towards, just the marketing towards that allocation list or that wine club, and you're kind of working towards that. And maybe that bleeds over into the wholesale game as well, depending on where your price point sits. But that's still a plan. That's still, you're doing something. You're trying to, promote your product. But there are folks that just don't do that. And for those of us, like, none of our wines have been rated or reviewed. And even those that do get their wines rated or reviewed, it's still hard. There's one of my best friends makes some killer wine. And they have, I think, 100 or 200 person waiting list for like their top end wine. Do you know how rare that is in this day and age? Pre 2008 financial crisis, you used to be able, the wait list for things of the, high end Napa wines, whether you're talking Harlan or Screaming Eagle or, any of these guys, the wait lists were outrageous. We had other friends, family friends who, post that recession were like, our waiting list is either gone, cut in half, or we have wine to sell, which we haven't had for like the better part of a decade. That kind of stuff happens. And now we're having to make up that ground and actively sell again. And that gets really, really tough. It's the hardest part because you're having to compete in some way, shape, or form. You have to provide some sort of value beyond the wine these days. There's too much good wine out there. Not that that's a bad thing, but there's so much good wine out there that how are you differentiating yourself? How are you taking care of your customers? How are you, distinguishing yourself and getting your label to stand out so that people want to buy it? How are you enticing them or courting them to bring in new customers? And that is the hardest thing. Are you doing the JC Penney model of like, hey, our wine is normally this, but we're selling it for this basement bargain deal? Are you doing the cult wine thing and saying, hey, we got the fancy, name brand winemaker. They make 100-point wines all the time. They're working for us now. Are you doing the, hey, we're hitting this price point and we want this wine to be in every grocery store in the U.S. or a steakhouse in the country or whatever? What's your plan? And so many people just don't have a plan. It sounds so simple, but that's the hardest thing. It's having that plan and being ready for it, being ready to execute. Because what's the cliche? It's, luck is a combination of preparation and preparedness, right? Practice or preparation or something like that, right? You can kind of create your own luck. And I think that's, for any business that's getting started, that's kind of it has to be your mentality, is that when something comes along, you have to be ready for it. And if you're not ready for it, you can't take advantage of it. Now you're stuck and you have nowhere to go. And in the case of carrying an inventory of a product, now you just have boxes stacking up in a warehouse with nowhere for it to go, without that preparedness to sell. Perfect example of this is, typically we don't distribute MTGA wines. This is a very down-home experience. This literally happened in the last week. We have a few friends around the country that have small distributorships that we've worked with very well in the past, and it's something that we're trying to kind of reopen still post-COVID and get our wines in certain markets around the country. And it just so happened, I'm in talks with one of them, And the next, no kidding, the next week, a group of folks come out from the Eastern Seaboard and they're like, oh, well, we have these 2 restaurants in this state. We are opening 1 more in this state. And we have 3 more that we're going to be opening over the next basically 5 to 7 years. We want to try and find a way to get your wines in here. And it just so happened, I'm like, oh, I just reached out to the guys that I work with who sell our wine in those states. Let me hit them up and let them know that we've got this basically baked in, and now we can just pounce. And now wine is moving, right? Just being prepared, having a plan and saying, hey, I can make this happen for you, creating those opportunities. That's the hardest thing to do. It's so simple, but at the same time, it's so hard for some people, for some reason, to have that sort of plan to sell what you're making. I don't care if it's wine. I don't care if it's hats. I don't care if it's action figures. Like, where are they? If you're watching me on YouTube, I'm trying to point to what's on top of my computer. These little guys, art, whatever the case is, you have to have some sort of plan, because your friends and family will buy from you once just because they support you, right? After that, after you've used up that Christmas card list, you gotta have new blood coming in to buy your product. And if you don't, you're gonna be dead in the water. So it's one thing to make the stuff, and it's one thing to enjoy the romance and the excitement behind harvest and bottling and having a wine finally ready to go. But the hardest thing about it is that business plan and figuring out how you're gonna sell it and where you go from there. Not only that, how you kind of weave and adjust, and going back to the first question of, why we stay small, I can turn on a dime. Much like that, distributorship, and trying to get some wine back out to the Eastern Seaboard, into some restaurants and retail shops. It's like, oh, we're ready. We can do this. We can pounce on this. We have this built into our business, and if we need to execute it, boom, we can do so. It was a beautiful moment. Sometimes it almost feels like I know what I'm doing. It's outstanding. All right, the last question. Well, maybe not the last one. We'll see how much time we have left. This one might be a can. Actually, we're gonna do one more after this, because this one actually is going to. This is gonna the Dylan Mulvany, in marketing kind of thing, as well as the SVB collapse that happened. We got a big old current events kind of thing. So, with the SVB failure and collapse, as well as the Dylan Mulvany fallout with Bud Light, how is that impacting the wine alcohol business when it comes to marketing, business, and all that good stuff? I paraphrased that a bunch. It was a very in-depth, kind of detailed question, but the SVB thing, let's get into that first and foremost, because that one's turned out it was a lot easier to deal with, and that is that they got bailed out. Turns out, despite the inverse ratio of investments that they had and how they were over leveraged, right, with their VC venture capital funds, they still got bailed out, and it's been a non-issue. For those that don't know, Silicon Valley Bank, actually, I think they were the first bank with like a proper wine division. And there are a lot of wine brands and labels that do their banking with them. And when they shut down, it sent ripples through the wine industry. I got calls from clients and friends who are in the accounting and banking world, and they're like, listen, if anyone needs anything, let us know. We'll try and help and do whatever we can. But all of them also said, this is likely just a wait until this bank sells off the assets and the loans or whatever, and they ended up getting bailed out anyway. So realistically, it wasn't that. It was a big deal, obviously, good old-fashioned bank run, but it ended up not having nearly the impact that many people thought it was going to. Those first few days when we were finding out about this, I feel like we were up in Tahoe when all this was happening. And look, we don't do any banking with SVB, so it didn't affect us in any way, shape, or form. But I know plenty of friends that do. And it was just, shoot, can we get access to them? And oh, by the way, our tasting rooms opened all weekend. All that money is going directly into these accounts that we now don't have access to. We don't know if we're going to be able to get that money back. And luckily, I have a very good friend that works very high up in kind of the accounting world, even forensic accounting type stuff for very big companies. And he was, in essence, of the opinion that, yeah, this is scary, but this is something that will shake out. It might take time, but hopefully, based on whatever business you have running, you can use the $250K that's insured by the FDIC. Use that, get that immediately, cover what costs you have. But for some businesses, what, $250K is like a day or two, maybe less, right? Depending on how big they are. So for the big guys, man, that's something else. For the smaller guys, is a little bit less of an issue because they might have been, underneath, what is technically federally insured. But it was wild. It was wild kind of getting thrown into the real world of business and bank runs and things of that nature. It was just absolutely wild. And I think what was even just crazier is that it happened, and then assets started getting sold. As parts of SVB were getting absorbed into other banks and that are backed by other banks, and it's like nothing. It feels like nothing. There's not been a peep about it in the industry for like a few weeks. I'm sure there's still a couple of people that are like really trying to dial it and figure things out and talk about it and figure it out. But man, it's like it's been radio silence probably for the better part of like 2-3 weeks, since it happened. It's kind of wild. It just kind of like came. It was like, oh my God, we're freaking out. And then it was gone, and like as quickly as it was here, because of how it all eventually just shook down. So it potentially had some outrageous ramifications, more so in the venture capital world, because of how much cash this bank had on hand. I think it was like Roku of all things had like it was like tens of millions of dollars in the bank, which is just crazy considering that, technically only $250K would be federally backed or insured. So they could have lost all of that, but they got bailed out. So turns out mid-sized banks that could potentially, send ripples through greater economies get the bailout too. It's not just the big guys like in 08, 9, 10, right? So apparently these mid-sized ones can, they get the benefit of the doubt every once in a while too. But yeah, that was a tough couple of days because there were wineries that simply didn't have access to their bank accounts, couldn't pay their bills, didn't have access to cash. It was like it was rough and tumble. But everyone seems to have gotten through it, and like I said, there just really hasn't been a peep about it since. So in fact, we got an email from the SVB a couple days ago because they do probably the most comprehensive like survey and status of the industry kind of seminar. It's actually some really great information about kind of broad market trends within wholesale, within direct-to-consumer. They do a really great job of kind of walking us through some of that info. Some of that we are going to get into as we started to see some statistics kind of come out this spring about, the post-COVID years of 21, 22, 23, and kind of what trends are happening. We're going to geek out about that in an upcoming episode as well, to kind of give you some more kind of insider trading into kind of what we look at within the wine industry and the world of hospitality. So it seems like they're back. I actually have a friend of mine that I went to college with. We were on the rowing team together. He works for SVB back east, and we were emailing back and forth just briefly. And he was like, yep, craziest couple of weeks I've ever had in my professional career. I'm like, no doubt. That had to be a little wild. All right, so we're going to talk about it. We are going to talk about it in a longer episode, this whole Dylan Mulvany thing, I'm taking, I think, a stance that, and having a conversation that no one else is having, is that people took this, the, trans inclusion route, how great we want to, Bud Light came out and said, the gal who's in marketing, who I think has been put on leave at this stage. Yeah, we'll get into that. Is now officially put on leave, says we're trying to move away from just like this frat boy culture. They released their press release saying, we're Bud Light, we want to bring people together over a beer and not divide people. Okay. It was funny that I guess it wasn't funny, but it was interesting that this came up when I was in Houston, and it was just a point blank question of how has this, from a marketing perspective within the alcohol industry, has it affected wine? And the short answer is no, it hasn't. I think you do have marketing departments for certain companies that are pumping the brakes on projects, much like Anheuser-Busch and InBev did. They paused all of their influence relationships after they saw a huge, their market cap decrease something like $6 billion. Whew, that's a tough pill to swallow. Because I think it's old data, but from like 2017, shortly after InBev acquired Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch. For those that don't know, Budweiser hasn't been Budweiser for years. They got purchased by InBev, the largest beer producer in the world, and have been owned by them since 2017. So it's been 8 years they've been under new management, basically. And I think at that point their market cap was something like 55 billion, which I'm sure has gone up significantly since then. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, that 6 billion is roughly a 5% drop, right? Just for the sake of argument. It might be more, it might be less. I haven't looked up that number. I'm going to try and get all these facts and figures down in the the May episode that we're going to dedicate to this. So they see, big losses coming. They pause all their marketing efforts to figure out. They put the gal who was in charge of this campaign on leave. A bunch of stuff happens. This has not sent any ripples through our industry, other than I'm sure there are marketing departments that have been trying to figure out, how to market this, because this is what marketing departments do. How do we capture new communities of consumers and get them to buy into what we do? That's what this is all about. If this is what we're going to get into in a couple of weeks, is InBev, and this marketing decision to put Dylan Mulvany on a can had nothing to do with inclusion. It had everything to do with capturing more dollars from consumers. This is pure and simple. Just I'm trying to shoot. I completely blanked on the word. Virtue signaling. That's all that it is. It's all that it is. Because if they actually cared, they wouldn't have paused their marketing efforts. They would have continued it, and they would have tried to market this to their current consumers. But when artists are canceling it from their tour dates and stadiums are getting rid of this beverage, you see billions of dollars potentially being lost. Interesting how that money changes everything very, very quick. So this is going to have long-term ramifications for marketing certain products within any industry, not just beer or wine or the alcohol industry in general. But this is going to hey, here's what happens, and here's how the largest beer producer in the world reacts to that kind of pushback, which in my opinion was not a very good look, especially if they were trying to do this for the sake of inclusion and whatnot, which it's clear that's not where their hearts were. Their hearts were set on the dollar signs, and they've very willingly thrown those that were in charge of this under the bus to try and remedy their losses that they now have. So that is a mess. The SVB thing was kind of crazy for a couple of days. This marketing thing is going to be interesting from behind the curtain of the alcohol industry, and we're dedicating a whole episode to it. Like I said, I know I'm like a month late to that conversation, but damn it, it's going to be an interesting one. And I think realistically, there are a lot of conversations being had that are simply missing the boat. And for those of you who don't understand how marketing works and the real intentions that InBev has behind this marketing campaign, I'm going to kick those doors down, and we're going to talk about it, because this kind of thing makes me angry. It does. It does. When things are done in the name of inclusion and equality, and it's very clear, no, this is about the dollars and nothing else. And they show their true colors already. They already did. It's a done deal, and we're going to get into why that is in a couple episodes. So we call that a teaser in the business, from what I understand. So you're going to have to tune back in at some point. This is how I capture more views and downloads. We talk about what we're going to talk about, and I say we'll get there. I promise. All right, what else do we got? We got time for one more. We got time for one more quick one. Let's see. Let me bring up my list of questions since we got a little bit of extra time here. All right. I also have my list of questions that I have already addressed because I'm sure there's going to be some overlap. Kind of is what it is. We're definitely going to try to make sure we don't have any repeats, but we may here and there. So let me make sure that I'm going to try not to do that in the first couple of months. We're going to try and hit new topics every time that we can, just for the sake of it. All right. Oh, this is a good one. Oh, I like this one. Okay, so this happened. This is interesting. There are wineries and places that are doing this and they're doing really, really well with it. But why is the wine? There's one of those winces. I twisted a little bit. Oh man, this back thing is a pain in the butt. Why are wineries so behind the times when it comes to technology? People are still filling out paper order forms. You don't have, tablets and things as widely available in small wineries. Why are the customer systems and software so out of date? I love it. I love it. Here's why, long story short, we'd rather spend money on grapes and barrels and making wine rather than the technology. It's really that simple. Right now, the cost of a lot of these systems are simply not, that juice is not worth the squeeze for many, many places. I mean, shoot, we don't use the best CRM ourselves, and there are a lot of people that don't. Because frankly, I just want really good accounting software. The CRM stuff, I can pull a spreadsheet and sort and filter through things, no problem. That's pretty quick and easy to do. There are some CRMs that have that kind of built in, where it's like, oh, I want to search for customers within a 100-mile radius of this zip code, and they can print out that report for you. There are others with certain like customer tags of like, here are all of our Cabernet buyers, here are the Merlot buyers, here are the white wine buyers, and so on. There's really great things that are in some of these systems. To be completely honest, I've been out and away from utilizing a lot of these for about 5 years, but I've had experience with AMS, which to my knowledge is still in essence a Microsoft DOS program. It's insane that wineries it's more of an inventory software and accounting I wouldn't even call it an accounting software, but it can do that, and it can process orders and all these other things. But the fact that people still use it is beyond me. It seems like it's so out of date. No hate. I actually used to do a lot of work with them, and they were definitely making big pushes to improve their systems, but man, it's compared to what we have today and what they're trying to constantly update is kind of wild. Again, it's been a few years. I hope that they've been able to, I remember talking about some of the upgrades and things they wanted to make, and I hope they've been able to make them because it was a fine system, but just behind the times, and they were playing a lot of catch up, it felt like. And it just is what it was. I think like Wine Direct might be one of the better ones right now. eSeller Solutions, like there are a handful of just software companies that have all this stuff kind of dialed in. The problem is, and this has been my bone to pick with all of them, is that there's always like some giant pitfall. Like it's not like there's this little quirky thing that you have to there's a quick like bypass for. No, there's always something in that system that makes it like truly awful and a pain in the butt to work with. And that's been the case, any one of these, but it's no different than any other piece of software. Like there are just certain things, certain programs that are better at doing certain things than others. But within the wine industry, the biggest reason that it's such an issue is that the integrations suck. They've gotten better. They have gotten a lot better, but we need, an accounting and point of sale software. Hopefully if you're using a different one for accounting, now those have to link up, and you need to be able to get all that data into your accounting software for sales and tax purposes and all that kind of stuff. You need compliance software because we have 50 different sets of rules that we need to work with depending on what state we're shipping to. So you have to have that compliance piece plugged in there. Then you have to have fulfillment software. And this is where I think Wine Direct and I think maybe Copper Peak have a leg up on some people, is that a lot of that flows really, really well. I think eSellers, when I worked with them, they always had a good job of this as well. Everyone has tried to kind of put a lot of this in-house, and like Wine Direct and Copper Peak have like their own warehousing and all this other stuff. So like that data flows through those systems quite a bit better. And I believe AMS was kind of the same way. eSellers was just at the time a software company, so it was like, oh, you have to have this software, and then that plugs into, this, you have to have this plugin or add-on to get it to transmit to your warehouse, and then your warehouse has to take that, and it was like there was like an extra step in there at the time. Again, it's been years. I'm sure these things have changed. But because of the multiple facets and the multiple layers from the point of sale to shipment and fulfillment, and I guess it's really no different than any other business, but for some reason, I always felt like the wine industry was just behind the times. Like all this stuff it never flows very, very well. The data migration for the longest time the data migrations we used to do from one system to another was just brutal. I mean, there were times where we had to go line by line for like 10,000 customers to make sure things didn't get jumbled up, and then we would migrate that data and it would still be jacked up, and we would have to, I mean, hours and hours and hours of time spent doing this stuff. So a lot of wineries, one, they're not willing to pay for it because it's clunky to begin with. Two, it's just easier for us and costs us less time and money to just kind of do it the old-fashioned way. Let me just download a spreadsheet of our customers. I'll sort by who's bought Cabernet, and that's it. Is it 2 extra steps? Yeah, sure. But I'm just looking at an Excel spreadsheet, and I spent 2 minutes doing that rather than calling customer service because the system's not running the report that we want to do, and these people didn't get filtered out, and so on. So I don't know. It's, for some reason, there's always been this clunkiness around software within the wine industry. And I know these guys have gotten a lot better. These systems have gotten a lot better. But I mean, for me, just the cost benefit analysis of how much time it's going to take me to get all that data migrated over, hook up all these other systems. I'm like, it's just not worth it. Like for us, we're just too small. Like we don't need it. We just don't. Would it be convenient? Would it make life maybe a little easier once we got it all set up? Yeah, but it's just not that big of a deal. It's not something that we focus on. I'd rather spend that money going somewhere else. Some of these, I don't know who's doing this, but I know a few of them are, is that a lot of these companies now, rather than like a subscription, just like monthly fee for their systems, they take like a cut, like a percentage or two of like your overall sales as well, which I'm not a huge fan of. That's a great way to build in, profitability. It's like, hey, if you're selling a bunch of wine, we make money. That's how this works. I'm like, okay, I get it. But it's one of those things for like small labels. It's like the margins are rough to begin with. To eat another like % or 2 or 3 away is just not cool with that. Especially on a small scale as we are. Maybe I know there are some companies that have like certain tiers and things where it's like, oh, if you're X amount of cases in production and sales and it's this, of course, then it ramps up or down, based on all that. It's the technology side of things for the big companies. It's one thing because just the volume of people you're seeing and the amount of business you're doing. For us small guys, I don't mind playing with a spreadsheet. It's really not that big of a deal. I have the time to be able to do it. If we were 10 times our size, it would be a different story. It just would be, right? If we were making 10,000, if we were making 3 or 4, like 3,000 cases where it starts to like ramp up, at that point, you're starting to have to dial things in a little bit more. So even if we doubled our size, now we're towing that line, and it would probably be a very different conversation. The smaller you get, the easier it is, as long as the systems, I mean, we use, just some basic, through Squarespace hosting for our website. We use MailChimp for our email automations. Like, it's basic stuff, and they integrate really, those two things integrate, and they're both very turnkey and easy to use and edit and do all these things, and that's perfect. For the accounting side of things, we use an accounting software for everything else that just fits the bill. It does just fine. It works great, as a matter of fact. It works really, really well. And they're actually, that reporting through that software has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years too, which is great, which is really, really great. So I guess the long story longer. The reason why wineries don't invest a huge amount in technology is that the juice isn't worth the squeeze for very many of them, unless they're really technically inclined. You look at like Paul Ma's vineyards, and their cellar. Whew, if you don't know about that, it's bonkers. It's pretty crazy, the tech that they have in that place to be able to, in essence, run that entire facility from an iPad. It's pretty. There's some cool toys in there. So there are those that dive headfirst into that technological realm. There are many of us that are just old school and be like, you know what, it's wine. We'll figure it out as we go. So. All right, that has been the April Q&A. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully that all shedded some more insight and answered some questions that some of you may or may not have. Again, I'm very excited to get into this whole marketing conversation kind of centered around this Dylan Mulvany thing. And realistically, what I think you need to be paying attention to when it comes to stuff like that. It's going to be a very different conversation than what many people have really tackled. I might fast track that and try and do that. It's either going to be the first week of May, next week, or the second week of May. I got to get that episode recorded, edited, and yeah, get through it. So that'll be coming up here soon. Please remember to share this with your friends. If you have anyone else who's into wine, wanting to learn more, just talk some shop and get to know the world of wine and hospitality a little better, please forward this along to them. The more shares and downloads and stuff we get, the more we can do, and the more input we get for our Q&As, other episodes, and all that good stuff. So it's something I do hope that this really becomes kind of an open conversation and more of a dialogue for some of these episodes, especially these Q&As and the live shows that happen on the third week of the month. So thank you all again so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Wind Up Podcast. We'll catch you later.